What if the key to deciphering the invisible architecture of a person's character lay not in what they proudly display, but precisely in what they strive most to hide, not from others, but from themselves? What if you were told that words, rehearsed gestures, and celebrated achievements are, more often than not, merely the facade of a much more complex and dark edifice? The great physician of the soul, Carl Gustav Jung, in conducting his archaeology into the deepest layers of the human psyche, did not bequeath us a simple instruction manual for judging others. He offered us something far more powerful and dangerous, a compass for navigating the totality of the human condition. Jung perceived, with a clarity bordering on the frightening, that the truth about an individual lies not in the calculated light they project onto the world, but in the immense and turbulent shadow they inevitably drag with them. All of us, without exception, are architects of a facade. It is a psychological construct of survival that Jung named with the Greek term persona, the mask worn by actors in ancient theater. This persona is our public self, our carefully edited and curated identity for social consumption. It's the competent me at work, the kind me in social gatherings, the calm and controlled me in front of family. It's the face we learn to show to be accepted, loved, and, above all, to feel secure in a world that constantly evaluates us. The persona is not, in itself, a lie. It's a functional necessity, an interface between our inner universe and the demands of the outside world. It's our ambassador in the court of public opinion. The problem, the true tragedy of modern existence, is not having a persona, but believing we are only it. It's merging so much with the mask that we forget the face beneath. And worse, we forget that we were the ones who put it on. This fusion is a seductive process, for the persona is rewarded. The world applauds our successful mask, and this applause becomes addictive, reinforcing the idea that our facade is our complete self. In the digital age, this construction has become even more extreme, with each social profile serving as an altar to our idealized persona, a sanctuary where complexity and contradiction are exiled in favor of an aseptic and unreal perfection. And what lies beneath? What inhabits the silent theater of the mind, beyond the lights of the social stage? There resides what Jung identified as the shadow. Imagine a vast, dark basement in your own home, a place to which you have banished, since childhood, everything that was considered unacceptable, inappropriate, or shameful. In this metaphorical basement, we lock away our most primitive impulses, our bitterest resentments, our most corrosive envies, our most paralyzing insecurities, and our wildest desires. But not only that, the shadow is the repository of all aspects of our personality that have been rejected by our conscious mind and the culture in which we live. This includes not only the negative, but also the positive that was deemed inadequate. The artistic potential of a man raised in a family that only valued brute force, the assertiveness of a woman raised to be submissive, the sensitivity of a leader trained to be ruthless, all of this is exiled to the shadow. It is therefore a treasure trove of unlived potential, a reserve of repressed vitality. It is our other self, our exiled twin, holding parts of our strength we never knew we possessed. Society, family, religion, all teach us, from an early age, to prune our nature. Don't be selfish. Don't feel anger. Don't be weak. Don't be irrational. Each of these mandates forces us to cut off a piece of ourselves and cast it into the darkness, creating a debt to our own wholeness. Crucially, the shadow is not a passive entity. It is a dynamic, autonomous force within the psyche, yearning for expression and integration. The more we ignore it, the denser and more hostile it becomes, behaving like a neglected child resorting to increasingly drastic acts to get attention. The real challenge, the monumental task that defines psychological maturity, is not learning to look at the other's mask. Anyone can do that. True wisdom, the almost supernatural ability to read what is unsaid and see what is not shown, lies in learning to identify the cracks in this structure. Keeping the shadow locked away, consumes a colossal amount of psychic energy. It is a constant effort, a never-ending vigilance, and this internal pressure requires an outlet. And, like a seismograph detecting subterranean tremors, there are two signs, two seismic manifestations that always betray the pressure the shadow exerts beneath the surface. They are not errors in the script of a person's life. They are, in fact, honest revelations. These are the moments when the shadow, impatient and hungry for recognition, manages to seep through the cracks in the persona, delivering a brutally honest portrait of the soul. The first sign is subtle, disguised as moral virtue, operating in the realm of judgment. The second is explosive, reactive, a moment when the internal pressure becomes unbearable and the mask shatters in the face of an external threat. Learning to recognize these two signs is not a parlor trick. It is the beginning of a deeper perception of human reality. It is understanding that each individual before you is not a unified entity, but a battlefield, a constant tension between the image they want to project and the truth they try to repress. It is in this tension, this psychological tug-of-war, that true character, in all its complex and uncomfortable glory, finally reveals itself. It's a dangerous dance between what we show and what we are, and most people spend their entire lives perfecting the steps of this performance, while stumbling upon their own inner truth. Before we move on to a detailed analysis of these two signs, it's imperative that you understand one fundamental premise. This knowledge is a mirror. It's not a window through which you can simply observe and judge the world from a safe distance. As Nietzsche warned us, when you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. This knowledge is that abyss. It's a two-way mirror. Whatever you learn to see in others, you will inevitably begin to see in yourself, perhaps with disconcerting, even painful clarity. The journey to decipher another's character is ultimately a one-way trip to the center of your own labyrinth, a confrontation with your own minotaur. Are you prepared for what you may find there? The question isn't whether you have the courage to judge others, but whether you have the integrity to confront what you'll discover about yourself. The invitation is extended. The door to the basement is ajar. And the first sign, the one that begins our investigation, hides where you least expect it. Not in an obvious weakness, but in the apparent strength of an accusing finger. The first sign, the first telltale crack in an individual's persona, manifests itself through one of the psyche's most ingenious and unconscious defense mechanisms: projection. To understand someone's character, Jung taught, we should pay attention not to what they say about themselves, but rather to what they say about others, especially when their speech is charged with disproportionate emotional energy. Projection is the involuntary act of attributing to another person a quality, trait, or desire that actually belongs to ourselves, but which our conscious mind refuses to accept. It is a psyche's illusionist trick. Instead of confronting the monster in our own basement, we project it onto the wall of our neighbor's house, where we can condemn and attack it from a safe distance, feeling virtuous for doing so. The mechanism is simple and devastatingly effective. If I cannot admit my own greed, I will see greed everywhere. If I can't face my own insecurity, I'll become obsessed with the arrogance of others. The world becomes a movie screen where we project the unresolved film of our own souls. The key to detecting this projection in action is not the content of the criticism, but its intensity. A calm, objective observation of someone's behavior is one thing. A fervent condemnation, an attack filled with rage, contempt, or moral indignation is quite another. This excessive emotional charge is the sound of the shadow screaming for attention. It's the heat that betrays the presence of repressed material. When you encounter someone who reacts with unbridled fury to a colleague's laziness, a politician's dishonesty, or a celebrity's vanity, you're not witnessing an objective moral judgment. You're witnessing an exorcism. The person is trying to expel from themselves a demon they don't have the courage to name. Consider the example of a businessman who has built his persona around the image of ruthless integrity. He is known in his circle for being merciless against any ethical lapse, no matter how small. In his speeches, he fiercely attacks corruption, lack of transparency, and the moral weakness of his competitors. His reputation is that of a bastion of righteousness. However, a careful observer, armed with the knowledge of projection, would notice the almost obsessive energy with which he pursues this issue. His condemnation is not cold and rational, it is heated, passionate, personal. What does this reveal? It reveals that his shadow is most likely saturated with the same impulses he publicly condemns. Perhaps he feels a constant temptation to cut corners, to use inside information, to manipulate situations to his advantage. But because these desires are absolutely incompatible with his persona of man of integrity, he cannot even admit them to himself. So, what does his psyche do? She projects these impulses outward. He sees his own dark desires in his rivals, and by attacking them, he is symbolically attacking his own shadow. He maintains his self-image of purity intact, while his psychic energy finds an outlet for his own internal struggle. His character, therefore, is not defined by his public integrity, but by the ferocity with which he needs to attack the lack of it in others. His virtue is reactive, defensive, and this constant defense reveals the strength of the temptation he represses. He is not strong because he is upright. He needs to appear upright because, deep down, he feels weak in the face of his own impulses. This phenomenon is by no means limited to what is socially condemnable. Shadow projection also occurs with neutral or even positive traits. Consider the person who constantly criticizes others for being dramatic or overly emotional. Often, this is a person who has been taught to repress their own vulnerability and sensitivity. They have locked their own emotions in the basement of their psyche because they consider them a sign of weakness. As a result, they cannot bear to see these same emotions freely expressed by others. The sight of another's vulnerability touches their own repressed vulnerability, causing immense discomfort. Their scathing criticism, "What an exaggeration! Why so much drama?" is not an assessment of reality, but a desperate defense to keep their own emotional dam intact. The character revealed here is that of someone profoundly disconnected from their own emotional life, someone living in self-imposed exile from their own feelings. But the mechanism of projection has a second, even more subtle and perhaps more tragic facet: the projection of the golden shadow. Jung observed that we don't just banish our negative traits to the unconscious. We also repress our potential, our light, our gold. When we were taught that it wasn't safe to shine, that our creativity was a waste of time, that our courage was recklessness, or that our intelligence was a threat, we learned to hide these qualities. They too were exiled to the shadow. And what happens to this repressed gold? We project it onto others through excessive admiration, idealization, and veneration. When you encounter someone who idolizes an artist, a leader, or a mentor to an almost superhuman level, seeing in them a genius, courage, or freedom that seems unattainable, you are witnessing the projection of the golden shadow. The person isn't truly seeing the other in their human and imperfect totality. They are seeing the reflection of their own unlived potential. The intensity of their admiration is directly proportional to the amount of their own gold they have abandoned. The young man who sees in his mentor a genius of leadership is often projecting his own capacity to lead, which he hasn't yet had the courage to embrace. The woman who sees in a friend extraordinary strength and independence is projecting her own strength, which has been suppressed by years of conditioning. This mechanism reveals a character marked by a deep sense of inadequacy, but also by immense latent potential. The person lives in the shadow of others because they are afraid of their own light. Thus, to read someone's character through the first sign, you must become a detective of emotional energy. Ignore, for a moment, the target of the judgment or admiration, and focus entirely on the source. Where is the heat? Where is the disproportionate passion? A violent condemnation reveals a dark and repressed shadow. A blind admiration reveals a golden and abandoned shadow. In both cases, the person is unknowingly telling you the story of their inner war. They are confessing to you which parts of themselves they have been forced to exile. And this is far more valuable information about their true character than any resume, speech, or social media profile. Projection is the constant leak of information from the soul. It is the shadow whispering its secrets through the lips of the persona. However, this is only the state of affairs when the pressure is controllable, when the leak can be managed through this subtle mechanism. But what happens when the persona's fortress comes under direct attack? What happens when external reality threatens to expose the truth that the projection tries to keep at bay? At that moment, the information leak turns into a flood, and the second, much more dramatic and unequivocal signal emerges from the depths. If the first sign, projection, is a whisper from the shadow, a subtle leak of information that slips through the cracks of consciousness, the second sign is an earthquake. It is the moment when the very structure of the persona, our social mask, is shaken to its foundations. This second sign reveals itself not in the calm, but in the storm. It is in the moment of pressure, when an individual's carefully constructed image is directly threatened, that their true inner architecture is unmistakably exposed. Carl Jung understood that the energy required to maintain the persona is monumental. It is a constant balancing act over the abyss of our own complexity. But what happens when an external force pushes this tightrope walker? What happens when someone is confronted with criticism that strikes a raw nerve, when their competence is publicly questioned, or when they are caught in a failure that contradicts their self-image? At that fracture point, the mask cracks, and what emerges is not a calculated response, but a visceral reflex, a spasm of the soul. It is in this spasm that authentic character, stripped of all its social trappings, reveals itself in all its nakedness. To understand this mechanism, imagine the persona not as a mask, but as armor. Each of us forges armor to navigate the battlefield of social life. Some forge the armor of the intellectual, polished with rationality and logic. Others, the armor of the kind, adorned with altruism and empathy. Still others, the armor of the strong and successful, impenetrable and brilliant. We wear this armor to feel secure and to project a specific image. The second sign for reading someone's character is to observe what the knight does when his armor suffers an unexpected blow. The reaction to this blow says more about the warrior than the beauty of his armor. Consider the persona of the unshakable intellectual. This is the individual who has built their identity around their intelligence, logic, and ability to always be right. Their armor is made of arguments, data, and an aura of rational superiority. In a debate or discussion, they are calm, methodical, and seemingly detached. But what happens when their argument is conclusively refuted? What happens when someone, perhaps of lower status, points out an undeniable flaw in their reasoning? This is the blow to the armor. A resilient and genuinely confident character, whose self-esteem doesn't depend solely on their intellectual armor, would react with curiosity. There might be a pause, a moment of reflection, followed by an admission like, "That's an interesting point, I hadn't thought of that," or, "You're right, I need to reevaluate my premise." Such a response reveals a person who values truth above ego, whose identity is vast enough to absorb the impact of being wrong. It reveals inner strength, not the fragile strength of the armor, but the resilient strength of the warrior within. Now, consider the reaction of a fragile character, whose identity is completely fused with their armor. When their argument is refuted, they don't feel that their argument has failed, they feel that they have failed. The blow to their armor is a blow to their very existence. Their reaction will therefore be defensive and aggressive. They may attack the messenger. You don't have the necessary training to understand the complexity of this. They may deflect the issue, but that doesn't change the fact that they may resort to obscure jargon to confuse their opponent, or they may simply explode in anger. This disproportionate reaction, this inability to tolerate failure, reveals that beneath the intellectual's armor lies a shadow laden with deep insecurity, and perhaps a paralyzing fear of being seen as inadequate. Their persona is not a tool they use. It is a crutch without which they cannot stand. Let's analyze another archetype, the good and helpful person. This is the person whose identity is based on being seen as altruistic, generous, and always available to help. Their armor is forged with sacrifices, favors, and a constant display of empathy. They are the friend who is always there, the colleague who takes on the extra work, the family member who never says no. Their self-image depends on the external validation of their kindness. Now, what happens when their help is refused? What happens when someone says, "Thanks, but I'd rather do it myself"? Or, worse yet, when their intentions are questioned? This is the blow to their armor of virtue. A genuinely altruistic character, whose kindness flows from an internal source of security, would accept the refusal gracefully. "Sure, no problem. If you change your mind, I'm here." This response demonstrates respect for the other's autonomy and a kindness that is not transactional. It demands nothing in return, not even the acceptance of help. The warrior beneath the armor is at peace with their own generosity, whether accepted or not. On the other hand, a character whose kindness is a persona strategy for gaining control, validation, or a sense of moral superiority will react very differently. Refusal of their help feels like a personal rejection, an invalidation of their identity. The reaction may be a form of passive-aggressive manipulation. "Fine, whatever you say, I was just trying to help," delivered with a martyr-like tone. Or there may be an outburst of wounded indignation. "After all I do for you, this is how you treat me." This reaction reveals that the kindness was not a gift, but a loan with sky-high emotional interest. Beneath the altruist's armor lurks a shadow, hungry for recognition and perhaps terrified by the idea of not being needed. Their character is defined not by their generosity, but by their inability to handle rejection. These moments of fracture are the ultimate stress test of character. They reveal the fundamental difference between having values and using values as armor. A person with resilient character has integrity, has kindness, has intelligence. These are aspects of their being, but not their entirety. A person with fragile character is their integrity, is their kindness, is their intelligence. Their identity is one-dimensional, and any threat to that single dimension is an existential threat. Jung stated that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. This complete acceptance includes the ability to accept our own flaws, our mistakes, and our limitations without our self-image crumbling. The defensive and explosive reactions we witness when a persona is threatened are the manifestation of a refusal to accept this totality. It is the panic of a mind that only knows itself through its facade and fears the emptiness it believes exists behind it. So the second sign is this. Watch closely not how people behave when applauded, but how they react when challenged. Observe the manager whose plan is criticized, the parent whose authority is questioned, the friend whose advice is ignored. It is in the heat of this moment, the instant the armor creaks under pressure, that the true metal of their character is tested and revealed. Projection shows us the contents of the exiled shadow. The reaction to the persona's threat shows us the strength of the chains that keep it down and the person's fear of its escape. Together, these two signs offer a remarkably accurate map of an individual's inner landscape, a map that reveals not the territory they want us to see, but the territory as it truly is, with its mountains of apparent virtues and its dark valleys of repressed fears and insecurities. And as always, this map serves not only to navigate the outside world, but to guide us back home, to our own uncharted territory. Now that we've uncovered the two primary signs, the projection of the shadow and the fracture of the persona, we enter the most dangerous territory of this journey. Possessing this knowledge is like being handed a sharp scalpel. In the hands of a conscious surgeon, it can heal and bring clarity. In the hands of an inflated ego, it can cut, wound, and dissect life to death. The question that arises and that defines the true caliber of our character, is not whether we can see these truths in others, but what we choose to do with the vision granted to us. The most immediate, and perhaps the most human temptation, is to become an analyst of the world, an omniscient judge who sits on a pedestal of psychological superiority, cataloging the neuroses and shadows of everyone around them. It's a seductive position. Suddenly, your boss's irritating behavior isn't just irritating, it's a clear projection of your repressed insecurity. Your aunt's excessive kindness isn't just kindness, it's a blatant reflection of your own repressed insecurity. It is a defense mechanism of a fragile persona that craves validation. Armed with this new lexicon, the ego finds an infinite playground. It can transform every human interaction into a diagnosis, and each diagnosis serves to reinforce its own sense of being above the disorder of the human condition. Friedrich Nietzsche, another master of depth psychology, warned us of this very danger. He who fights with monsters must be careful not to become a monster himself. And there is no monster more subtle than the ego masquerading as an analyst. For the very moment we use this knowledge to label and diminish the other, we fall into the very trap we intended to observe. Our very act of judging becomes a projection. The need to point out the other's shadow reveals our own shadow, a shadow that perhaps craves power, control, or a way to feel secure in a chaotic world. The scalpel turns on us. In attempting to dissect the other, we end up revealing our own pathology, our own fear. The true purpose of this knowledge is therefore not to create a hierarchy of consciousness, but to dissolve it. The second step, inevitable for those who persist in this observation with honesty, is what we might call the mirror effect. At first, the window through which we observe others appears to be made of plain glass. We see their projections and defenses with crystal clarity. But over time, the glass begins to darken and transform into a mirror. Every observation made about the outside world begins to echo in our inner universe, forcing a relentless self-confrontation. You're in a meeting and observe a colleague defending themselves against criticism with disproportionate aggression. Your first reaction is a cold analysis. Ah, the second sign. Your persona of competence has been threatened, and your shadow of insecurity has emerged. For a moment, you feel the observer's clarity. But if you have the courage to hold this moment longer, a second, much more uncomfortable question will inevitably emerge from your own abyss. What about me? When was the last time I reacted like this? What was the blow to my armor that made me draw the sword of defensiveness? Perhaps you remember that time a friend made a harmless joke about your punctuality, and you responded with cutting acidity. In that moment, it wasn't your punctuality that was at stake. It was your persona as an organized and reliable person that had been threatened. Your reaction wasn't about your friend, it was about the panic of having your armor scratched. This mirror effect is the true guardian of this knowledge. It prevents analysis from becoming merely a distant intellectual exercise and transforms it into a practice of continuous and, at times, brutal self-awareness. You can't point the straw in your brother's eye for long without feeling the weight of the log in your own. We discover, disconcertingly, that the patterns we see out there are actually our own unresolved psychic material. The world is not a laboratory full of specimens to be studied. It is a hall of mirrors, where every portrait of another contains a fragment of our own face. This realization leads us to the third and most transformative stage, the transition from analysis to a radical form of compassion. This is not the sentimental compassion of the poor thing, which is often just another form of superiority. It is a compassion forged in the fire of recognizing shared struggle. When you understand that a person's most destructive behavior, their arrogance, their aggression, their manipulation, is often a symptom of their inner war, something shifts. You begin to see not just the behavior, but the mechanics of the pain behind it. You realize that the person ferociously projecting their shadow is not evil. They are terrified of what they carry within. The person whose persona shatters in rage is not powerful. They are terribly fragile. clinging to their only source of identity. This understanding does not excuse the behavior. Actions have consequences, and healthy boundaries are essential. But it contextualizes the behavior within the tragedy of the human condition. It allows us to respond to the other's dysfunction, not with blind reactivity that only fuels the cycle of projection and defense, but with a sober clarity that can sometimes defuse the situation. Seeing the shadow behind the act is seeing the frightened child within the tyrant. It's understanding that the heaviest armor is worn by the most wounded warrior. This compassion is not an act of kindness toward the other. It's an act of realism. It's the recognition that we are all, to varying degrees, fighting the same battle against our own inner dragons. And this realization opens the door to a much more authentic and, paradoxically, much safer form of interaction. Finally, this knowledge allows us to apply what we might call an integration test, a meta-signal that assesses an individual's capacity for growth. After observing the signs of persona projection and defense, the true measure of someone's character lies in their reaction, when their own shadow is gently mirrored back to them. What happens when you, in a non-accusatory way, question someone's narrative? Consider the person who vehemently condemns everyone's laziness. If you ask them, with genuine curiosity, I wonder if sometimes our frustration with others doesn't stem from a relentless demand we make on ourselves to never rest? You are offering them a mirror. A rigid and resistant character, deeply identified with their persona, will react with more defense. That has nothing to do with it. Laziness is laziness. They will attack the mirror, as they can't stand the image it reflects. Your inability to even consider the question is a sign of a deeply entrenched shadow and a low capacity for self-awareness. On the other hand, a developing character, even if their initial reaction is defensive, may pause. There may be a silence. Later, they may return to the subject, or you may notice a slight change in their behavior. This opening, however small, to self-reflection is the most promising sign of all. It reveals a psyche that, despite its defenses, is not completely closed off. It reveals an ego that has the strength to eventually look into its own basement. This integration test is the ultimate tool, as it shifts our role from passive observer to conscious participant in the psyche's dance. It shows us that the ultimate goal of reading character is not to reach a final verdict on who someone is, but rather to understand where each person is on their own journey of integration. It's the difference between taking a static photograph of a person and understanding the direction they are heading. And that, ultimately, is the only information that really matters. Having traversed the ethical territory of our inquiry, where knowledge reveals itself as a mirror and compassion emerges as the only sane response, we now reach the heart of the labyrinth. This is the phase of the journey where the very nature of our search is questioned. We learn to identify the signs, the shadow that leaks through projection, and the persona that shatters under pressure. We learn to be careful with the scalpel of analysis, lest we become monsters of our own ego. But now, an even more fundamental and destabilizing question must be asked. What if the very search for the truth of another's character is the ultimate trap? What if the act of reading someone is, in itself, the most insurmountable barrier to truly finding them? Here we enter the observer's paradox. The moment we position ourselves as analysts, we create a separation. We cease to be participants in the unpredictable dance of human interaction and become spectators with a notepad. This distance, which initially seems like a source of clarity and objectivity, gradually becomes a prison of isolation. The world ceases to be a place to live and becomes a text to interpret. People cease to be mysteries to be connected with and become puzzles to be solved. And in this process, vitality, spontaneity, and the possibility of genuine connection evaporate. The persona of the analyst, our identity as someone who understands depth psychology, becomes our own armor, perhaps the most sophisticated and difficult to detect of all. It is an armor forged not in steel, but in concepts. We feel safe behind our theories about shadow, persona, and projection. This armor protects us from disorder, unpredictability, and, above all, the vulnerability of an authentic encounter. After all, it is much safer to diagnose someone's shadow than to expose our own. The consequences of this analytical stance on our most intimate relationships are profound and often devastating. Consider romantic relationships. When one partner assumes the role of unofficial psychologist, the power dynamic becomes irreparably distorted. Every conflict, every moment of vulnerability from the other is met not with participatory empathy, but with a distanced interpretation. Your anger right now isn't about me. It's about your unresolved relationship with your father. This need for attention of yours is a clear manifestation of your shadow of neediness. These statements may even contain a grain of truth, but their function in the interaction is not to heal, it's to control. It's a way of disarming the other's emotion, of placing it in a conceptual box, and elevating oneself to a position of superiority. The partner being analyzed no longer feels seen, but instead feels dissected. They are not sharing their pain with an equal. They are presenting their symptoms to a clinician. This dynamic creates an environment of profound psychological insecurity, where spontaneity is punished with interpretation and vulnerability is met with a diagnosis. Intimacy dies not from a lack of love, but from overanalysis. The space between the couple, which should be filled with a shared mystery, is colonized by the analyst's arrogant certainty. Love demands presence, not a diagnosis. It demands that both partners be willing to descend together into the arena of uncertainty, disarmed of their theories, and to encounter each other in the confusion of shared experience. The analyst, by definition, refuses to enter the arena. He prefers to observe it from a safe vantage point, an act that, ultimately, is a betrayal of the very essence of connection. This same erosion occurs in family and friendship dynamics. The friend who becomes the group's mind reader, always ready with a theory to explain everyone's behavior, ends up isolating themselves. People begin to edit themselves in their presence, hiding their complexities for fear of becoming the next case study. The beauty of friendship, which lies in unconditional acceptance and the freedom to be imperfect, is replaced by cautious performance. Similarly, children of parents who constantly analyze them, rather than simply relate to them, grow up with a paralyzing self-consciousness. They learn that every emotion and every behavior will be interpreted and catalogued, and as a result, they lose touch with their own spontaneous core. They become experts at managing their own image to meet the expectations of their parents' diagnosis, losing the ability to simply be. See, and herein lies the great turning point, the truth that this knowledge holds for us at the end of the journey. The true sign of an evolved character and profound psychological wisdom does not lie in the ability to read the hidden character of others. This is the skill of the initiate, of the apprentice who has just discovered the power of the scalpel. True mastery, true transformative power, lies in the ability to create a psychological space around oneself that is so safe, so devoid of judgment, that others feel free to lower their own masks and reveal their character willingly. The supreme task is not to be a detective of the soul, but to become a sanctuary for it. Consider the fundamental difference between these two stances. The detective seeks clues, is alert to slips, to contradictions. Their presence generates tension. They are hunting for the truth. The sanctuary, on the other hand, seeks nothing. It simply is. It is a space of silence, acceptance, and unconditional presence. Its presence generates calm. It does not hunt for the truth. It invites it to emerge. When you interact from this place, your energy shifts completely. You stop listening to someone's words to find the projection hidden within them. Instead, you listen to understand the experience being shared, however confusing. You stop observing someone's behavior to detect the cracks in their persona. Instead, you offer a presence so stable that they don't feel the need to defend themselves. Paradoxically, it's when you abandon the search for the other person's shadow that they're more likely to show themselves. A person who feels genuinely accepted, who doesn't feel the pressure of analysis, will begin to share their insecurities, fears, and contradictions willingly. They don't need you to find the cracks in their armor. They'll feel safe enough to remove it in your presence, This is psychology at its highest. It's not a tool of power over others, but a tool of service to their soul. It's the recognition that the greatest gift we can offer another human being is not our analysis of their truth, but the creation of a space where they can discover and share that truth for themselves. The goal, therefore, is not to become an expert at deciphering masks. It's to become the kind of person before whom masks become unnecessary. This shift in focus, from detective to sanctuary, is the final and most crucial step on our journey. It prepares us for the true application of this knowledge, not as a method for reading the world, but as a path to transforming it, one person at a time, always starting with ourselves. And so, we reach the end of our path, but the true beginning of the work. We have traversed the landscape of the human psyche, learning to decipher the whispers of the shadow and the tremors of the persona. We have journeyed through the ethical danger of using knowledge as a weapon, only to discover that it was actually a mirror. And finally, we face the ultimate paradox, that the goal is not to read others, but to create a space where they feel safe to reveal themselves. The transition from detective to sanctuary is not just a change of tactics, it is a revolution of the soul. It is the point at which psychology transcends theory and becomes a spiritual path, a practice of life. Now, the final and most important question remains: how? How does this transition take place in practice? How does this intellectual map become a compass for the heart, capable of guiding us through the chaotic terrain of our daily lives? The answer, in essence, is as simple as it is demanding. The work is not outward, it is inward. The ultimate focus of these two signals is not their application to the world, but their obsessive and relentless application to ourselves. The journey to reading anyone's character ends with the challenge of reading, for the first time and with complete honesty, our own. The first practice is that of radical self-observation whenever the first signal manifests in you. The next time you feel a wave of intense judgment towards someone, be it anger, contempt, or exaggerated admiration, instead of letting this energy project outward and solidify as a truth about the other person, you must intercept it in mid-flight. In that instant, you must have the discipline to stop and ask the question the ego fears most. What is this reaction saying about me? If you condemn a colleague's arrogance with disproportionate fury, the question is not whether or not they are arrogant. The question is, where does my own hidden arrogance reside? Or perhaps, where does my fear of being seen as arrogant lie? A fear that forces me to portray a fragile humility. If you feel irritated by a friend's passivity, the issue isn't their passivity. It's about your own inability to rest, your compulsion to act, a part of you that yearns for silence, but that you've buried under layers of productivity. See, this act of holding back the projection and questioning it is the first step toward integrating the shadow. It's not about guilt, but curiosity. Each intense judgment becomes a beacon that illuminates an exiled part of your own soul, waiting to be rediscovered. The second practice, and perhaps the most difficult, is that of honest self-confrontation when the second signal manifests. The next time your persona is threatened, when you receive criticism, when your authority is questioned, when you make a mistake, you will feel the visceral urge to defend yourself. Your armor will creak, and your hand will instinctively go to the sword of justification, attack, or victimization. In this critical moment, the practice consists of creating a pause, however small, between the stimulus and your reaction. In that tiny space of awareness, you must ask yourself, what is truly being threatened here? It is not your existence, but an image. It is not your intrinsic worth, but a story you tell yourself about who you are. The pain you feel is not the pain of annihilation, but the pain of an illusion being pierced. Having the courage to stay with this pain, rather than reacting to it, is the most powerful act of psychological strength there is. It's saying to yourself, yes, this hurts. It hurts to be seen as incompetent. It hurts to be seen as wrong. It hurts. By allowing yourself to feel the legitimate pain Jung spoke of, You no longer need your defenses. You discover you can survive the blow to your armor. And with each blow you survive without retaliating, the armor becomes less necessary. You begin to build an inner strength that doesn't depend on any external image. You cease to be the fragile warrior hiding behind heavy armor and become the flexible warrior whose strength lies in their own vulnerability. This practice transforms every challenging interaction from a threat into an opportunity. Each criticism becomes a teacher that shows you where your identity is still trapped in your persona. And each time you choose reflection over reaction, you reclaim a piece of your soul that was held hostage by fear of other people's opinions. When you commit to these two internal practices, something magical begins to happen externally, without you making any effort. Your presence changes. People around you feel, on an unconscious level, that they are not being analyzed. They feel they are in the presence of someone who is doing their own inner work and therefore has no need to project or defend themselves. You become the sanctuary. Imagine a conversation with a friend who is going through a difficult time. The old me, the detective, would be listening, but also analyzing. He's victimizing himself. This is a projection of his powerlessness. The new me, the sanctuary, simply listens. It offers such total and non-judgmental presence that the friend, sensing this space, can reach their own conclusions. Perhaps, at the end of the conversation, the friend themselves will say, "You know, I think I've been feeling like a victim in all this." The truth emerged, not because it was extracted by an analyst, but because it was given the safe space to be born. This is the transformative power of a person who is integrating their own shadow. They heal the world not by what they do, but by what they have become. They don't offer solutions. They offer a space where solutions can be found. Your journey to read the character of others fulfilled its ultimate purpose. It taught you that the only person you needed to read was yourself. And in doing so, you granted everyone around you the freedom to do the same. Carl Jung's psychology, at its core, is not a manual for understanding the mind. It is an invitation to embark on the journey of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, whole and indivisible. The two signs we have explored are not the end of the road. They are the gateway. They are the keys that unlock the door to your own basement, your own attic, the forgotten rooms of your soul. The work is long, lifelong, and demands a courage few are willing to summon. But the reward is the only one that truly matters. Freedom. Freedom from the weight of judgment. Freedom from the fragility of the persona. The freedom to finally put down the armor and walk through the world with the calm strength of someone who knows and accepts themselves completely. If this journey resonated with you, if you felt the call to look deeper, don't let this moment pass. This work is the most important adventure of your life. To continue exploring these territories of the soul, I ask that you join our community. Your involvement is what fuels this space. So, if this video brought you any value, please leave a like so this message reaches more people who may be looking for it. And, in the comments, share a reflection. It could be an experience, a question, or simply the word shadow to signal that you are accepting the invitation to your own journey. Even if it's anonymous, your voice matters. And, most importantly, subscribe to the Psychosophia channel and turn on notifications. Our exploration is just beginning. Thank you for having the courage to journey with us this far. Your presence is proof that the search for consciousness is alive.